Hey Gators, it's Dr. Jensen, and I'm very pleased to bring to you some new material for this semester. In past student evaluations, students requested media training, and I agreed. So many students work in various criminal justice organizations or are seeking employment there, and we have plenty of students bound for law school. And obviously, all of us could use a little bit of help polishing our presentation skills. So this module is meant to bring forward some media training for you so that you can represent your organization well and yourself even better. It also is meant to serve as a way to pull together so many concepts that we've talked about in this course, like social constructionism and perception to the public of what criminal justice is all about. When you're on camera or near a table where someone's interviewing you and taking notes, it's not as easy as it looks to get all your talking points together and make a great interview. But hopefully this video will push you along a little bit further than you were before. But let's get started. So first I want to thank Steve Orlando from the University of Florida Office of Public Affairs in helping me pull together this information. So this is media training for on-camera and print journalism. And Steve has trained hundreds and hundreds of professionals before they go on camera or are represented in print media. So first of all, on-camera interviews. Be sure to speak slowly and clearly. Rehearse your talking points. The key to giving a successful message-driven interview is to know what story you want to leave with the reporter. Stay focused because it is your story and no one is better able to tell it than you. It's easy to not feel confident in these settings, to feel like, oh, there are so many other people better at this than I am. But sometimes given the media deadline, the proximity and location, and other factors, you're it and you have to be ready. You can even take a few moments before the interview begins to go jump in a car or step into a quiet room and just talk out loud for a few moments. Make sure that you are speaking clearly and you come up with your main message. If you don't do that, you could really fluster the interview and end up saying things you don't want to say. And it does help to practice. Keep your answers short, 12 to 15 seconds maximum. It's easy to go on and on and on after one question and feel the need to share the entire story. But that story can be shared in subsequent questions and prompts. Be able to crystallize your thoughts into a few hard-hitting sentences. So think of the money statement that you want to leave. And if an interviewer could only remember one or two things from the interview, what would those things be? Practice transitions and build rapport with the interviewer. You could say things like, "That's a good point. I appreciate that question. I can tell we're on the same page because," and those things really do help the collaboration between the interviewer and the interviewee, because it's tense for both parties to get the story out. The interviewer wants to pull all the juicy stuff out and the interviewee wants to keep some of that juicy stuff in. But if you can help share the rapport and extend some appreciation or recognize good interviewing, that actually helps a lot. Wear vivid colors and avoid white. It makes you look washed out. Plaids and checks are okay, but avoid very small patterns. So I'm going to demonstrate this on camera in just a moment. You might not want to do something like this. So if you look at me now, I have a striped shirt on. And you could say, well, Jensen, you said plaids, checks are okay, avoid patterns. This isn't necessarily a pattern, but you can tell that a solid color just does so much better. The shirt I had on previously was a periwinkle shirt, and this one just kind of makes everything too busy. So I'm going to zoom in just to kind of give you that visual. The other really good thing to do is if you're going to interview in a location that's indoors, try to find something that's a solid color. So in this room right now, I just have kind of plain colored walls. It's fine to have a chair or a door in the background. The camera crew can help maneuver you to a better location, but this is perfectly fine. If you have a very cluttered office, you might want to rethink that location, but the camera crew and the reporter can help you navigate that too. But again, do you see how busy this is? It's a little distracting, and a solid color is better. So I tell students it's good to keep a shirt for interview purposes in your desk or your bag while you're on the go. Something crisp and clean, something that doesn't wrinkle easy. You might want to bring some wrinkle spray to spray on there. Maybe a blazer or a jacket to kind of take the look up a notch, but it really does help a lot. The other thing you don't want to do is this. So this is a tough one for law enforcement because often law enforcement wear hats, especially if they're interviewing outside or in the field. Hats are part of our everyday wardrobe in law enforcement, and especially part of tactical gear if you're working in different weather conditions. And it's perfectly fine to interview in a ball cap, but you might want to go over to the mirror of your vehicle or the rear view or the restroom and just kind of straighten your hat. You'd be surprised how many people wear their hats a little bit crooked. And you also want to make sure your hat is at a reasonable level so that you don't pull it down too far to where parts of your face are blocked. And you also don't wear it too high to where your face looks elongated and stretched out. I know everyone has a different hat style, but you want to wear the hat with the brim somewhere in the middle of the forehead, depending on your features. So hats are not off limits, but just be aware of lighting and how shaded your face gets, and think about those kind of things. If you're worried about removing your hat and having kind of hat hair, then just keep a comb in your bag and something that can kind of spruce things up very quickly. But let's get back into our more media interview appropriate gear. That's better. So again, you just have to think about what you wear. And again, check your collar, make sure everything is straight and crisp. And you have a few seconds to do some of that before the camera starts rolling, and realize that some of that can be edited out too. I've been on camera with reporters and literally been told to comb the side of my hair because I have a funny bubble coming out of it or a hair out of place. And that's okay. Don't be offended by that. It happens. When we're shuffling around, stuff moves and sometimes things look a little goofy. So they will try to make sure you look your best. All right. Avoid distracting jewelry like big dangly earrings, fluffy scarves, or hats that cover too much of your face. So again, it's kind of some of those basics of how to be seen as well as you can while on camera. Talking with your hands is okay, and it feels natural to some people, but you don't want to do so much of it that your hands become more of the show than your face does. It's a little distracting. Keep them away from your face and avoid touching your face and your hair, because this kind of starts to get in the way of your message. So if you feel like you're someone that flips their hair a lot as they talk, or you get nervous and maybe you tuck your hair behind your ear, or you're constantly kind of adjusting or primping, you might want to think of a hair clip or a hat or something that's going to work a little better for you. Do not touch your chest where your microphone may be attached, because it feels like someone just punched you in the back. It'll amplify any sound that happens there. And some people do that while they're describing action. They'll say, that guy got hit so hard like this. And it sounds like a bomb went off because your hand is so close to the microphone. When you're thinking, make sure you look down. So I'm going to demonstrate this as well. So a thinking eyeball looks more like this. When you're looking at the camera or at the interviewer's face, you want to look down. That looks more thoughtful and considerate, like you're mulling over some ideas in your head. Some people think it looks like you're sorry or you feel bad, but you'd be surprised it doesn't come off that way on camera. When you look side to side, it looks kind of suspicious, as though you don't know the answer and you're seeking to escape the situation. It just doesn't look very good. Or if you look up, it kind of looks like you're lying or thinking about something that's not true or trying to distort something. So as you can tell, it's a little off-putting visually to look up and side to side. So if you feel the need to stop and think for a few moments, try to train yourself to look down. Unless you're on live TV, don't be afraid to ask for a do-over if you fumbled. You'd be surprised how easy it is to edit and get the very best bits of your interview. And don't ask for too many do-overs because these journalists are still working on a deadline, and we have to be considerate of that. So finally, a few do's and don'ts when it comes to Zoom. And as you may have noticed, many more interviews can happen on Zoom or Skype, whether it's audio only, visual, or even just getting the information. So with Zoom, you have to think about a couple of things. No one is expecting you to turn your bedroom or office into a professional television studio. That's unrealistic. But there are a few things that can take moments that really improve the space and the quality of the interview. So think about background and noise. So again, as you can tell, my background is very plain and there aren't a lot of distractions behind me. I could even angle my camera a little bit more to kind of cut the door out of focus, or position my chair so that you don't see the door at all. So again, just something to consider, but you shouldn't have to rearrange a ton of furniture to do this. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you use appropriate lighting. The way that my camera is set up is I have a window in front of my face, which pushes some natural light onto my face, and I also have lighting behind me. So make sure you're not pushing shadows too far. And you can even use what they call zoom lights or ring lights that kind of help illuminate the face. It's a little weird to be kind of right in a stark light. You get used to it, but it can kind of hurt your eyes after a while. So just keep that in mind. Do not use the webcam as a mirror. Even if this is never going to go on camera, if you're kind of cleaning up your face, you feel a little sweaty, or maybe you were at the scene of an accident and you were picking up debris off the ground and suddenly you have some car grease on your hand and it ended up on your cheek and you really need to clean yourself and get that mark off. The webcam is not the place to do that. It's very off-putting and awkward. So just be careful of that. You want to make sure you look into the camera and maintain eye contact. So here's a few things to think about there. When I look into the webcam, I can really focus on the blinking dot, and it really makes you feel like I'm looking right at you. But if you're with an interviewer and the interviewer is part of the scene or actively interviewing while on camera, you need to answer the person that's talking to you. So if the interviewer were over here and they asked me a question about how many people were at the scene of this incident, then I would want to answer my question to that person, because it's a little awkward to suddenly get a question from over here and then answer right here. It's kind of strange and it feels a little spooky. So make sure that you maintain personal eye contact to the interviewer that you're talking to and you respond in that direction as well. No one expects you to get up close and personal with the camera because it's the camera not asking the question, it's the person over there. So just don't feel pressure to look into the lens of a camera unless you're directed to do so. But for Zoom, it really does help the interview to look into the camera. Make sure you declutter your screen, because if you're transitioning between shared screen and webcam, people will see all your business on your monitor. You might need to minimize some things or even close some applications so that you don't embarrass yourself. One other thing that I see that's a big problem is angle. So if you have a built-in webcam, adjusting the angle, suddenly I have a ceiling fan in my view. If I adjust the angle a little bit, I can completely cut it out. My head should be somewhere near the top of the screen, but not cut off. I also might want to adjust my chair or my sitting level so that I'm the appropriate level for where my screen ends and where my body begins. Now keep in mind, most people will be zooming at what we call bust or shoulder level and up, and occasionally waist level and up. But Zoom is usually kind of from about chest level on above. So you can keep that in mind. All right, more media training. And this is kind of more in general. So if a reporter asks you for an interview, ask what the topic is before you agree. You don't want any surprises, and it's really unfair for you to agree to something that you don't know about. Think about the audience, what information is relevant to them, and what will persuade them. You want to think about how best to represent yourself and your organization. Review any policies your organization may have in advance. Sometimes if you get a request for an interview, you have to actually record that request in an office so that they can keep track of these requests. Sometimes they have people in mind or trained that can answer for you, where you can feed information to that person and that person can be your presenter. Every organization's different, so just make sure you follow those rules. Make a list of talking points in advance. So 3 is usually a good number so people can keep track of them. There's no need to memorize them verbatim, but do rehearse them so you know them and you can pivot back to them as needed during the interview. Don't come up with 9 talking points and try to list off all 9. People don't even remember that many. They can barely remember 5 or 7 points. 3 is a good rule of thumb. You may ask for a list of questions in advance from the interviewer, but don't be surprised if that reporter declines. They want answers that don't sound scripted, and the only way to accomplish that is to have a little bit of spontaneity in the interview. Otherwise, it'll be kind of robotic. You will not be allowed to see the story before it airs or is published, so do not ask to. It is highly unusual to get to see it before it airs. And we don't always like how we're presented, and that's okay. We may have our own preferences, but so does the public. And we have to establish a little bit of trust in the editor's room before we get too picky about how we're presented. Realize they have deadlines and sometimes hours and minutes before this thing has to be cut and dry. So be patient with them. I know we're all concerned about media bias and media spin, but unless it's a matter of investigation, a court gag order, privacy, or national security, you probably will not be allowed to see the interview in its entirety before it goes to air or print. Avoid sounding defensive. This is probably everyone's biggest media fear, is getting into an argument in the middle of the interview. So for instance, if a reporter gives you a leading question, like, wouldn't you say race relations in the community are bad? A good way to respond would be, I wouldn't really describe it that way. So then you're not kind of getting into a fight. You're just saying, I disagree, but you're disagreeing respectfully. Or you can say, that's an interesting idea, but it is important not to lose track of this. So you give merit to maybe some of the commentary that's going on in that question, but you don't want to validate it. You can redirect the response and say, you're thinking about this in the wrong terms, or you need to make sure that this isn't missed. So again, transitions are really helpful and they don't come naturally, so you have to practice them. If a question heads in a direction that you don't like, use the pivot. That's an interesting question, but what's really important is this. And then loop back to your talking points. Stay positive, be personal, and conversational. Turn negatives into positives. If you are asked to give feedback on a negative question, don't give negative language back. So for example, if the question from the reporter is, didn't your staff prove to be ineffective in the investigation? A response could be, absolutely not. We have always provided a level of service and diligence that met our community's needs. So you can kind of compliment your department on the back end. Don't be afraid of silence, because some reporters will actually pause after you answer. It's a little bit of a trick in interviewing, and often it's so that they can finish taking notes. But sometimes it's because they know people are uncomfortable with silence and will be compelled to keep talking to fill that dead air space, which can lead to giving more information than you wanted to and maybe giving out some juicy bits that they can use. So if you don't want to fall into that trap, just kind of practice being comfortable breathing and taking pauses. Finally, don't answer for someone else. So if someone says, how do you think your boss feels about the budget situation? Don't answer for them. You can simply say, I don't know, you'd have to ask them. Or I'm not sure, you should really seek them out. Avoid speculation. We don't want to assume anything and let people represent themselves. Reporters will often end interviews by asking if there's anything that they forgot to ask or anything you'd like to add, and you can use that as an opportunity to reiterate your talking points. So hopefully you found this pretty useful in just going through some of those do's and don'ts of interviews, which are applicable in so many different settings. It's not as easy as it looks, is it? It's hard to keep from flipping hair, it's hard to stop from fidgeting with fingers, and not everyone is as articulate as they would like to be. But with practice, you get better at this. And just know that the media is there to represent the truth and drive the story to the public in a way that's interesting and informative. So you don't get into as much media spin as you'd think, like the really dramatic news shows that we see on national media. More likely, you will be interviewed by local and regional outlets, which don't really go in that angle. So don't let fear drive your interview of being misrepresented. Let this be an opportunity for you to engage and share. They are cheering for you because they want a good interview. And they can't get a good interview unless they help you in that process. Good luck.